The microphone screeched for a second, a sharp, ugly sound that made everyone wince. My sister Vivian just laughed into it, her white dress glowing under the reception hall lights. The wedding was perfect. The flowers, the food, the string quartet playing softly in the corner. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. I knew because I had paid for every last detail. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me, where in the world are you watching from? My name is Elena Whitmore. I was sitting at a table near the front, close enough to see the tiny crystals sewn into her veil. I just want to thank everyone for coming, Vivian said, her voice bubbling with happiness. She thanked her new in-laws, our parents, and her bridesmaids. Then her eyes found me. A playful smirk crossed her lips. And I have to thank my sister Elena, she said, her voice lifting. My forever single, always working sister. Who would I have to look up to if not for her? The hall, filled with 300 of their closest friends and family, erupted in laughter. It wasn't a mean laugh, not really. It was the kind of gentle, knowing laugh people share at the expense of the reliable, single family member. The spinster aunt in training. I felt every single one of those 300 pairs of eyes land on me. I forced a smile, my cheeks burning. My heart wasn't just beating. It was pounding, a heavy, dull drum against my ribs. I picked up my water glass, my hand trembling just slightly, and raised it in a toast I didn't feel. They were laughing at the quiet. Dependable Elena, the woman who blended into the background. What they didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that the woman they were laughing at was the one who signed their paychecks. The woman they saw as a background character owned the stage they were all dancing on. And I was about to let them know it. Our childhood in Savannah was painted in 2 different colors, Vivian's and mine. Hers was bright gold. Mine was a muted, serviceable gray. Vivian was the dancer, the charmer, the one with a smile that could light up a room and a personality to match. Our home was a shrine to her accomplishments. Her ballet trophies lined the mantelpiece. Her honor roll certificates were framed on the wall. Her laughter was the soundtrack of our family. I was the quiet one, the dependable one. When Dad got laid off from the plant, I was the one who sat with him at the kitchen table at night, going over the bills, my 13-year-old hands tracing the columns of numbers. I figured out what we could cut, where we could save. He'd pat my head and say, "What would I do without you, Lena?" Then the next day, he'd scrape together enough money to buy Vivian new point shoes for her recital. Her success was the family's success. Mine was just expected. I got a full academic scholarship to college. My parents celebrated by taking Vivian out to her favorite restaurant because she'd had a tough week of rehearsals. I didn't complain. I just packed my bags, took the bus to the university, and got a part-time job to cover my books and food. My worth was never measured by who I was, only by what I could provide. I was the foundation of the house, unseen, uncelebrated, but essential. Everyone just walked all over me to get where they were going. By the time I was in my 30s, I had accepted my role. I was the stable sister. I had a good, steady job in finance, a quiet apartment, and a savings account that I regularly dipped into to help my parents with a new roof or to fund one of Vivian's whims, like her short-lived jewelry-making business. I was the family's emergency contact and their human ATM. Then, the man I had been with for 5 years, the man I thought I would marry, told me he felt like we were more like roommates, and left. The heartbreak was a physical thing. It felt like a part of my chest had been carved out. I called my mom, sobbing, and she listened for a few minutes before saying, "Well, honey, you've always been better on your own anyway. You're so independent." It wasn't a compliment. It was a dismissal. My pain was an inconvenience. My feelings were, as always, secondary. That was the moment something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud, dramatic break, but a quiet, clean one. I realized I had spent my entire life waiting for an applause that was never going to come. I was waiting for someone to see me, to value me, and it was a waste of my time. So I stopped. I stopped trying to earn their approval. I stopped hoping for their love. I took all that energy, all that pain and longing, and I turned it inward. I channeled it into myself. 2 months later, I quit my job, packed my apartment, and moved to Charlotte. I didn't tell them until I was already gone. "There's more opportunity here," was all I said. They didn't ask many questions. Vivian was busy with her new boyfriend, Graham, and my parents were planning a cruise. In a small, rented office with a second-hand desk and a coffee machine that gurgled, I opened Whitmore Strategies. It was a consulting firm. It sounded small. It sounded boring. It was perfect. It was mine. Whitmore Strategies started small. My first clients were local businesses struggling to stay afloat. I worked 18-hour days. I lived on coffee and takeout. I didn't rebuild my life. I built a new one from scratch on my own terms. I was good at it. I could see the cracks in a company's foundation, the inefficiencies no one else noticed. I wasn't just balancing their books. I was restructuring their futures. Slowly, quietly, my firm grew. I started using my profits not just to consult, but to acquire. I bought up small, struggling companies that had potential. A logistics firm here, a small tech startup there. I never put my name on them. I operated through my central company, Whitmore Strategies. The world saw me as a mid-level consultant. My family thought I had a nice little business. In private, I was building an empire. I was the silent owner of a dozen mid-sized corporations across the Southeast. One day, my acquisitions manager brought me a file. Stanton Dynamics, a regional engineering firm, was over-leveraged and poorly managed. It was a perfect candidate for a takeover. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. I approved the deal. We acquired a controlling interest, and I began the process of restructuring the company from the top down, starting with installing a new chief operating officer who reported directly to me. A month later, Vivian called, screaming with excitement. "I'm engaged. His name is Graham, you've met him. He's a project manager at this great company, Stanton Dynamics. We're getting married in Charleston in the spring." I sat in my corner office overlooking the entire city of Charlotte and felt a cold, strange wave wash over me. The two worlds I had kept so carefully separate were about to collide. When Vivian announced her wedding, the family's reaction was immediate and predictable. My mother called me, not to ask if I could help, but to tell me the deposit for the venue was due. My dad sent me an email with the subject line, "Caterer Bill." Vivian had a shared Pinterest board for the wedding, and she would text me links to $1,000 floral arrangements and a $5,000 dress with the simple message, "This one." No one ever said the words, "Elena, can you pay for this?" They just assumed I would, and I did. I paid for the venue, the caterer, the Vera Wang dress, the photographer, the open bar. I transferred the money, and no one said anything more than a quick, "Got it, thanks." It was easier to pay than to fight. It was easier to be the foundation than to explain that I had built my own skyscraper. During one of the planning weekends, I was in Charleston with Vivian and my mother, tasting cakes. Vivian took a bite of a lemon raspberry confection and sighed dreamily. "This is all so perfect. It's the biggest day of my life." She looked at me, a pitying little smile on her face. "You're so lucky, Lena. You get to be part of something this big for once." The words were a slap in the face. Part of something big? The event wouldn't exist without me. The cake she was eating, the roof over our heads, the very clothes on her back. I was paying for it all. But I just smiled. "It's your day, Viv. It should be perfect." I made a promise to myself then. No drama, no scenes. I would get through this wedding, watch her get married, and then I would go back to my life, the one none of them knew anything about. I would let her have her moment to shine, even if she was shining in a light I had provided. The night before the wedding, after the rehearsal dinner, Vivian pulled me aside in the hotel hallway. She was flushed with wine and attention. "Okay, Lena, a little warning for tomorrow," she said, her tone conspiratorial and condescending. "Graham's boss is going to be there. His name is Robert Hale. He's the COO of Stanton Dynamics. These are serious, important people. So, please, don't go on and on about your little business, okay? It's sweet that you have a hobby, but let's just try to be impressive. Don't embarrass me." My pulse didn't just tighten. It turned to ice. Robert Hale, the man I had hired 3 months ago. The man who sent me a detailed financial report every Friday. The man who had no idea his ultimate boss was the quiet sister of the bride. For a moment, I wanted to tell her. I wanted to see the look on her face. But I just held her gaze. "Don't worry, Vivian," I said, my voice perfectly even. "I wouldn't dream of it." That night, I lay in my hotel bed staring at the ceiling. My plan had been to stay silent out of submission, to keep the peace. But now my silence felt different. It felt like a strategy. It felt like power. I was back in the reception hall, the laughter washing over me. First, it had been the maid of honor, who had toasted to Elena, who proves that a successful career is just as good as a husband. Almost! The crowd had tittered politely, but Vivian's joke was different. It was sharper. Calling my life's work a so-called business empire wasn't just a jab. It was a denial of my entire existence, and the crowd roared. Even Graham, my new brother-in-law, the man whose salary I technically paid, was smiling, a smug, satisfied look on his face. I sat perfectly still. The burning in my cheeks faded, replaced by a strange, cold calm. The more they laughed, the calmer I became. I watched them. I watched my sister preen under the spotlight, my parents beaming with pride. They were all so happy in the little world they had built, a world where Vivian was the sun and I was a distant pale moon. My silence was no longer about keeping the peace. It was about choosing the right moment. It was the quiet before the storm. A few minutes later, after the speeches had ended and the band had started to play, a man approached my table. He was in his 50s, with a sharp suit and a confident air. Robert Hale. He gave me a polite, dismissive smile, the kind of smile you give to a stranger at a wedding you're obligated to attend. "You must be the bride's sister," he said. "I am," I replied, my voice quiet. I stood up and extended my hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person, Mr. Hale. I'm Elena Whitmore." He shook my hand, his grip firm. "Robert Hale." "I know," I said, my voice still soft, but clear. "I own Whitmore Strategies. We acquired Stanton Dynamics last quarter. Your reports have been excellent." The change in his face was immediate and absolute. The polite smile vanished. The confident set of his shoulders stiffened. Shock flooded his eyes, followed by a flicker of panic, then dawning, horrified comprehension. He looked from me to Graham, who was laughing with a friend at the bar, completely oblivious. He looked at Vivian, who was now dragging our father onto the dance floor. He dropped my hand as if it were electric. "Ms. Whitmore," he whispered, his voice hoarse. I had no idea." "Most people don't," I said calmly. He stood there for a moment, processing. Then, without another word, he turned and walked directly to the stage. He motioned for the band to stop playing and took the microphone from the stand. The music died down. The chatter in the room faded as people turned to see what was happening. "Excuse me, everyone," Robert Hale said, his voice now booming through the speakers. He sounded much different than he had a moment ago. He sounded respectful. He sounded nervous. "I'd just like to say a few words. Tonight, we've heard a lot of jokes about the bride's sister, Elena Whitmore." He paused, and a few people chuckled, remembering. Graham and Vivian looked up, smiling, expecting another funny story. Robert Hale's eyes found mine across the room. "I think you should all know," he continued, his voice steady and strong, "that the woman you've been laughing at, Ms. Whitmore, is the owner of my company, Stanton Dynamics. She is, in fact, the woman who signs my paycheck, and the paychecks of many other people in this room, including the grooms." Absolute, deafening silence. The only sound in the entire hall was the quiet clink of a fork being dropped on a plate. Graham's face went white. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Vivian's beautiful, radiant smile collapsed. It didn't just fade, it shattered. In that dead quiet, I stood up. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt calm. I looked at my sister, at her stunned, broken face, and I said the words I had been holding on to all night, all my life. "Silence isn't weakness," I said, my voice carrying easily through the silent room. "Sometimes it hides strength." The aftermath was chaos. The silence broke, and a wave of frantic murmuring filled the room. Suddenly, our table was the most popular spot in the reception hall. Graham's colleagues, who had barely glanced at me all night, rushed over to introduce themselves, calling me Ms. Whitmore, their voices dripping with a sycophantic respect that made my stomach turn. Guests I didn't know came up to apologize for laughing. Graham stumbled over to me, his face pale and sweaty. "Elena, I don't understand. Why didn't you say anything?" But I didn't look at him. I looked at Vivian. She was trembling, mascara starting to streak down her cheeks as tears welled in her eyes. The perfect bride, now a portrait of public humiliation. She pushed through the small crowd that had formed around me. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her question wasn't about understanding. It was an accusation. It was her way of blaming me for her own embarrassment. I looked directly into her eyes. My voice was quiet, but it was unflinching. "Because you never asked," I said simply. "You never saw me. You just saw what I could do for you. You only wanted me to be small so you could feel big." The truth landed between us, heavy and undeniable. In that moment, she finally understood. She hadn't just mocked her quiet single sister. She had mocked the source of her perfect day, the architect of her own fairy tale. She hadn't been laughing at a failure. She had been laughing at her own benefactor. 6 months later, family dinners are different. They are quiet, strained affairs. Graham speaks to me with a formal deference, always calling me Elena, never Lena. He asks about my work, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and respect. My parents are cautious around me, as if they are meeting a stranger for the first time. Vivian is the most changed. She's in therapy, trying to unravel years of jealousy and cruelty that she had disguised as sisterly teasing. Sometimes I see a flicker of the old her, a flash of resentment in her eyes. But mostly she is just quiet. She is finally learning to listen. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for peace. My empire continues to grow, quietly and efficiently. My confidence is no longer something I have to build. It is simply part of who I am. I never needed them to see me. I just needed to see myself. Never underestimate the quiet sister in the room, the one who stops letting herself be underestimated. Like this story if you've ever been the silent one, because sometimes silence isn't just golden. It's the loudest power you will ever have.